Hey folks, Clint Powell, and I'm about to bring on my guest. But before I do, I wanted to make sure you knew all the different ways you could find the conversations I have. Go to Apple or any of your podcast platforms and just look up. Hey folks, Clint Powell here. And before I bring on my guest, I just want to make sure you know how to get a hold of all of my content. Hey folks, it's Clint Powell. And before I bring on my guest, I want to make sure you know how to find my podcast. Just go to Apple or any of your podcast platforms and look up During the Break podcast. I also have a radio show that we convert over to a podcast. But if you want to hear all those radio show, hey folks, it's Clint Powell. And before I bring on my guest, I want to make sure you know how to get into. Hey folks, it's Clint Powell. And before I bring on my guest today, I want to make sure you know how to find my podcast. Just go to Apple or any of your favorite podcast platforms and look up During the Break podcast. I also have a radio show that we put online and convert over to podcast. It's about business, marketingmixradio.com. Been doing that one for 7 years. Love it. I think you'll find it entertaining and informative because we have conversations with really cool people. And also dayfirepodcast.com. I host it with a guy named Dawson Wheeler, who is a true adventurer. And we bring on people from around the country, around the world, doing great and crazy things. We talk conservation, gear, tips, and we share a bunch of stories. Dayfirepodcast.com. Now, with that being said, let's get to it. People, and a lot of times I'm lucky that I get cool people, smart people, and friends all in the same bundle. And today I think I have that. We're going to talk sales and sales management. Bam. Brian, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, good, man. How are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I have a question before we get started.
Uh-oh.
What is the yellow championship-ish looking belt behind you on the wall?
That one right there?
Yeah.
So 3 years ago, I went through life changes 4 years ago. Some life, necessity gave me some necessary changes. And so I had to focus some efforts on getting mentally healthy and physically healthy. Part of that was I started boxing again. And after about a year, some friends of mine asked me to go enter this boxing competition. It was in Kansas City. It was the Ringside Masters World Championship Boxing Tournament. And it's basically old men boxing. And so I went to Kansas City and I entered it, and I was lucky enough to win.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Remind me not to make you mad.
As long as you're old, I'm old. I got a shot. If everybody's really, really old, and there's a lot of old guys that I know that I don't have a shot against, but if you pick your opponents wisely, you got a shot at it. You and I met back 20-something years ago, I guess, or pretty close to it, at another radio station across town, and you got a job as just a regular old sales rep like I was.
Yeah, selling air. Absolutely.
Nothing's easier than selling air. Just, hey, by the way, thank you for the signed contract and here.
Absolutely.
Hey, what did you do before radio, man?
Well, before radio, it's funny because I was not one of these guys that was destined to get into sales. I'm maybe a little introverted by nature. I never was one of the cool kids. I enjoy sports and kind of regular stuff, but not really a real extroverted guy. I wasn't the guy that was the life of the party or anything, but I had kind of an interest in health and fitness, and I worked at the sports barn when I was in college. And a guy there by the name of Don Bowman, who a lot of people know, kind of took me under his wing and mentored me and had me helping people with memberships. And so that was my beginnings into a sales career, and I loved it. And I like the fact of being able to kind of write your own paycheck and do a little better than an hourly wage, even as a college kid, and had some kind of early success with it, and really liked it. So when I graduated school from UTC, I looked for a sales job, and I found one at Radio Chattanooga and was always intrigued with advertising. So I got into that crazy business, and that's where we met. And from there, it's just been kind of like a wagon rolling down a hill. It's kind of taken me where it's wanted to go.
Well, once you get into sales, and like you said, you get used to, every day I can give myself a raise.
Yeah.
It's hard, especially if you're good at it. It's hard to let go of that and then go do something else. But quick side note on Don Bowman. So I know Don pretty well, and I used to go to the sports barn a lot more often, and he found out I was doing this. And Don is a good boxer. I mean, Don's a really good boxer, and he pulled me aside when I would go in there and started giving me tips before I went out. And the thing about him is he was really physical. He would grab me and say, all right now, and he would start tapping me. I'm like, hey, dude, stop hitting me. You're good at it. And it hurt, you're just trying to give me, we weren't boxing. He would just pull me out of nowhere. Come here, Clint. I want to show you something. Now, when you get in there, if your shoulder's doing this, I was like, you're way too good at this and hitting me too hard.
How do you think I learned how to sell? I wasn't even trying to box. He's doing that to me.
But he's a good teacher, and he's a good teacher, and he also, once you've been that successful at something, you get to a point. I know you're kind of there too, but he likes giving back to people. He likes making sure people around him that he's giving them something back, and that's why I like him. And so anyway, and I know he came in and spoke to us a couple of times when we were at Radio Chattanooga for sales meetings. He would come in and give us some tips and his perspective on stuff. But he's a good guy. Why do you think, just between me and you, since you are an introvert, or you consider yourself that, why do you think you were as good at sales? Because a lot of people have the misconception, if you're not this, I got to be the bigger than life kind of personality. What made you so good at it?
Well, I think a few things. And first of all, I don't know that I put myself in a category of being that great at it. I think I've just made it for a long time. So I'm going to chalk it up to perseverance and not giving up. And I really believe, though, being persistent and having a little bit of grit and hard work has a lot to do with it and being successful. But I would say two other factors that are really big is, number one, having good mentors. If I look back at my career in sales, whether they were my direct managers or not, having good people along the way give you advice, encourage you, give you tips and tactics, man, that's invaluable. So I would say that's probably been the most important factor. And I would say the other is just a good fundamental knowledge, because, all of us in any kind of career or any kind of athlete, when you have some success, you tend to start to plow your own path. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that own path leads to shortcuts, and shortcuts lead to bad habits. And so having a foundation where you can go back to basics whenever you hit a slump is super important, because if you don't have that foundational knowledge and you hit a slump, then you kind of roll off the cliff. But if you have that good foundation and you hit a slump, then now you have some basics to go back to and kind of get yourself reset, find your center, and kind of get back at it. And man, I tell you, I've had to do that multiple times. And, there's just some basic principles that if you stick to and you have the right people around you to remind you of that and encourage you, then it's really not a bad life.
I wrote an article a long time ago, and I used to do these seminars, and part of it was, in my opinion, if you're successful, and you can define that how you want to, but if you consider yourself successful as a salesperson, one of the most dangerous things for that, one of the biggest challenges, will be success. It can derail you the fastest because you stop doing what you were doing. And I'll speak a little bit to what you just said, then I'm going to let you tell us what you think some of those basics are. I think me and you are successful in different ways, but I am probably one of the guys that was successful despite my habits. And you are probably one of those guys that are successful because of your habits. And you say you can fall back on them. But for years, I was doing great, and I had created some shortcuts because I was doing so good. Man, people like me. Mm-hmm. I'm selling. And I got to where I started looking at my numbers and started developing some of those habits. But some of the habits of pipeline maintenance, some of those habits some of the habits that you're supposed to have, I kind of just was like, I'm just so busy I'm out here moving. Next thing you know, I'm the guy I wrote the article about. The most dangerous thing for Clint was success, because I had not built the foundation for success. What are some of those basics that you try to instill into salespeople, or you use yourself?
Over doing this for about 20 years, I've come up with three things. They are the three things that most salespeople shortcut, but I think they're the three things that are the most basic and easy to fall back on. And I'll
Well,
tell
when
you
you
what
say
those.
these three things, though, I want to see if I've kind of messed them up. I want to see if they're relevant to me. I want to see if I messed those up too.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I think the first one is asking good questions.
Oh,
Sitting down with your prospect or client, uncovering what the needs are, the pain points, because ultimately, whatever you offer them has to be a solution. It has to make their life better in some way. And I think salespeople get excited and focused on their product
mhm.
or focused on their service without thinking about connecting the dot as to how your client or prospect is actually going to utilize that service and how they feel about it. And I think that as salespeople, we have a tendency, and I use this saying a lot, I tend to overuse it, but I think we get in the habit of selling the drill bit when at the end of the day, your prospect wants a hole.
Yeah.
And we spend too much time talking about the drill bit and we don't spend enough time talking about the hole. And the way to get to that conversation is to ask questions and to be curious and genuinely listen to the prospect. I'm not talking about going through a 5-question CNA because it's what your boss told you to do. I'm talking about having a genuine desire to want to help that prospect and a genuine curiosity to learn about them and why they even engaged you. And that is invaluable because when you have that genuine desire to learn about them, you do three things. Number one, you find the pain point and the need.
Hmm.
Number two, you find what the hot buttons are. So from a tactical standpoint, you know what to zero in on. The third and most important is you build rapport. And when you build rapport with somebody, then comes trust. And guess what happens? When you have trust with somebody, you'll do business with them. And trust is a two-way street.
Well, I tell people all the time, people do business with you for two reasons. You're either fixing a problem or you make them feel good. It's one of the two things. They need a hole, right? Or they need a hole plugged, one of the two. And you've got the solution. And I didn't have a problem with asking the right questions, but I will say if you're a beginning sales rep and it feels awkward to you because they give you this list of questions. Do you remember they taught us the CNA and they gave us the questions and your first couple times you go in there. So tell me about your business. Great. How long have you been in business? Great. Well, you almost have to go through that. And that's the reason you kind of role play at first until you develop your own way of understanding, until that empathy for the client can kick in. Because a lot of times when you're a new salesperson, at least for me, I was very self-conscious. I was very aware that I was new. I am new. They know I'm new. I don't really know what to ask. I'm nervous. And I would leave a lot of times meeting with a client and have not written anything down or forgot some stuff and have to call them back. So if you're a new salesperson, what Brian just talked about is that curious part. I think kind of that bank account rises as your confidence in things kind of grows too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally, totally.
You got to make it your own.
Yeah, totally. And so number two, asking the right questions, I think is first and foremost number one because you got to find that solution. I think the second thing that salespeople tend to forget is trial closing. And I'll tell you, this is what has helped my career. And let me explain that. A lot of people view sales as a little bit of a dirty business. They think of high pressure. Most people have had an experience to where somebody has been either too persistent with them or hardball or made them feel bad. And I just never wanted to be that guy. And so trial closing is so important because along the presentation, during the process, what you're doing is you're actually getting an opinion from your prospect versus a decision. What happens in sales a lot of times is we tell them how great we are, how great our product is, and then we ask for a decision when we have no idea what their opinion is. We don't know where they stand. It's like asking a pretty girl on a date when you don't even know if she likes you or not. Like, you've got to get an opinion along the way and know where you stand. And so to me, it's so important that after you do that needs assessment and then you address how your product or service addresses part of that need, to check in with them and find out how they feel about it. And then if everything's favorable, move to the next step. If at any point in the presentation something feels a little weird, or they have more questions, or they're uncertain, now's your time to address it. And don't move to the next step until that door is closed. That's why it's a trial close.
So let me ask you this. Does that look like, if I'm not mistaken, this is where you get to correct me, but when you're going through what you're bringing them back to kind of, fit, to create the whole as your comparison, you're looking to them. You're not looking at your president. You're looking to them and going, does that make sense? Is this
Absolutely.
right? Did I nail this? Did I get this right? Am I heading in the right direction? You make that your own, but you're asking them along the way before you're saying, now sign here.
Yeah, and I'll give you a great example. So I spent, almost a dozen years in the home improvement field. And so when we were in the house talking to a homeowner who was looking to get a project done, okay, like new window installation, okay, what we would do is when we would talk about our company, before we even got into the product and got into the pricing, we would make a habit of asking that homeowner, hey, listen, if we set the product and the price off to the side for 1 minute, at this point, do you feel comfortable hiring our company to come in your home and do work? And if the answer to that question is yes, that is a green light for me to move into the details of the project. If there is a yellow light or a red light at that point, in other words, they're like, oh gosh, no, I'm not quite comfortable yet, or hey, I've got more questions, then I want to address those right then and there so that I can get that green light to then move to the next step. And the reason being is once you introduce money, and you start asking for decisions when money is on the table, that's when it becomes awkward. That's when people feel pressure. That's when salespeople feel uncomfortable. That's when the whole thing goes awry. And so my belief is that I have a favorable opinion along the way during the presentation before you get into the awkwardness of money.
Yeah, and that's a lot of times if you get to that point too early, or if you've not done what you've suggested right now, that's when you'll get the generic, oh, let me think about it. Really, it's not that. It's that they didn't get they didn't get the comfortable feeling 10 minutes ago. It's just too expensive right now. In reality, you just didn't do it right the first time. So I love the trial close concept. You finish that point up and then get to your third one, because so far I may actually have to add one to your three unless you nail me, because so far I'm pretty good at those two when I'm successful, when I'm in my game. So I'm going to see if you've nailed me on the third one.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, just to wrap up the second one,
Yeah.
I think, Chuck Wilkins said it best. He said that what you're trying to do is build a corral to where anything other than deciding what you have to offer just doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah.
And I really believe that if you do a good needs assessment and you're able to address those concerns and get yeses along the way, now all of a sudden it's an easy decision, and it's an assumption moving forward. So it's not a high pressure situation for your prospect.
And one more thing, just listening to you talk about this too, it also is more natural of how conversations go. I mean, if I'm presenting to you and I'm stopping and actually care, it's not, I got to listen to you for 15 minutes and then all of a sudden you're asking me for 20 grand. It's actually introducing just how humans interact naturally. So it probably makes everybody more comfortable that I'm not being presented to, and the pressure is not on you to present.
Absolutely. We're in the people business.
Yeah.
This is about helping people at the end of the day. What we do and how we do it and all that are just details in the big scheme of things. But at the end of the day, we're just here to help each other.
All right. What's got number three? Let's hear it, man.
All right. Number three is silence.
Oh, I'm good at this one too. All right, good. I'm going to add another one after you're done. Go for it.
All right. So silence to me is just so important. And I'm going to tell you a story when I was a rookie sales rep. So I'm all of like 22 or 23 years old, pedaling KZ106. And it's funny, I was just telling this story to some guys this morning, but I rolled up to a place that sold manufactured homes. Okay. So it's a big gravel lot with a bunch of these double wide trailers. And I roll in, and there's this young guy that runs the sales center. And I can say young guy now because at the time he was like 31 or 32 years old. He's running this sales center where these guys are hawking mobile homes. And he was kind of a cool guy. He was really nice to me. And anyway, he gave me this meeting. I did a discovery meeting with him, learned about what they were doing, and then I went back and pitched him something. And I pitched him an advertising campaign for like 6 months or a year. And I can't remember how much it was. It was $2,400 or $2,500 a month or whatever. And, he grabs the paper from me after I present, and he he does this thing to where he grabs my presentation, he kind of kicks back in his chair and he's doing it. And then he does the old, in selling radio, you've seen them do that where they take it, they're dividing the spot rate. They're, typing on their calculator, So he starts doing all that number. Well, when he starts that, I'm like, okay, so that's actually, $47 a spot or whatever. And he just looked at me and goes, shh. Okay. So he sits there and he just keeps twisting around in his chair and doing whatever he's doing. And then I'm like, and just so you know, I've got another option that's a little bit less. He goes, shh, he who talked first loses. And I just kind of sat back. And by this point, I'm a little embarrassed because I've not been on that many sales calls. I'm young, I'm new at this. I'm sitting here in a suit and tie, sitting in a place that sells double wides, and this dude's like telling me he who talks first loses. And he goes, "Hey, let me tell you something." He goes, "One thing I learned about sales is that when the prospect is thinking, they're buying." And what I needed to tell you is that my ad budget's like 10 grand a month. And I'm sitting here doing the math, figuring out how I can fit your thing in and figuring out who I'm going to cut to make this happen. And you keep interrupting me. So would you shut up long enough for me to figure this out? And that was his way of just kind of being a big brother and being nice to me, what I said about mentors earlier.
Yeah.
And he ended up being a great client, for several years. And so anyway, point being, I think as salespeople, we get excited. We like our product. We care about the prospect. I had checked the first two boxes. I'd done I knew what he needed. I knew what we needed to do. I felt great about it. And I was so damn excited about it that I didn't slow down long enough to let him think. And, a lot of times we try to answer questions that people don't even have. And at the end of the day, when you go to buy a car, the car salesman isn't telling you about the lug nuts.
Yeah.
You're buying a car. You're not buying the chassis and the lug nuts and, from piece by piece. But as salespeople, we tend to get caught in our own world and get enamored with details. And sometimes people just want to slow down and think and how they might make it happen. And so I think being quiet and really taking time to listen and let them process is just super important.
I used this, you came and spoke, this is probably 10, 12 years ago. And I heard about you talk about the power of silence, and we had used it. I'd been taught it and I was pretty good at it. But when I started doing seminars, I started talking about this to sales reps because I did a bunch of seminars for sales reps or lunch and learns. And I was in Nashville. This is probably 6 or 7 years ago. And part of it was for a group of about 50 sales reps. And part of it was talking about the power of silence. And I was in front of them and I said, I'm going to show you how heavy silence can be. And I got quiet. And this is the only time I've done it for this long. Usually I'll do it for 10 seconds, but I was in front of these people and I did not talk for 30 seconds. It felt like eternity. It was so heavy. You could see people starting to shift in their seats. They were looking at each other. They were looking at their watch. They started averting my eyes. And the reason is in that silence, things are happening. And that was intentional. But when you're asking somebody to sign a contract, that silence, things are happening just because you're not aware of it. So I think it's a great point. And I kind of took that from that time you came and talked to the sales team, I don't know, probably 15 years ago, 20 years ago. It's been a while.
Yeah. So tell me what your fourth is.
All right. And then I got to ask you about, don't let me forget, I want to talk to you about emotions. And then I want to share a story with you because you told a good one. But and I don't know how you would categorize it, but where I messed up was I was great at being curious with the client. I love that. I love the conversation. I was pretty good at bringing back and getting the trial closing. And I was decently good at the silence part. My problem is I did not put what you said. I did not put basics in of time management of habits in place as I started getting successful. So what happened is, and you nailed it when we first came on, I started getting success. And so the top of my ship became really heavy. I had not laid enough wide foundation down to handle it. And I just stopped doing the prospecting. I would prospect in spurts. And I'm not saying it's this way all the time, but if you're managing your success correctly, then you'll look at your week and it should be somewhat consistent. Like, all right, I do this time. I know this behind the scenes. So my time management was just not what it should have been. And maybe it goes with it. But on the other side of it is I learned behind the scenes pretty well, but I didn't really learn how to manage other people's support well. In other words, and you know this goes, I know it, what I'm about to say, if people watching this are going to kill me. How many times I would go to Chris or to Vicky and go, I got a spot that's supposed to start at 11 o'clock. I've known about that for 2 days, right? But because of my lack of time management or my lack of understanding what it takes on their end, I just made a lot of chaos. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally.
So the time management part of it for Clint was, that's the killer. Because if I get successful, I'm moving this direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not build in the time to build my own personal habits so I could handle that success. And I think that's as important. If you're really good at the things you just mentioned and you become successful, but if you don't put in how to manage your time, it can't sustain itself.
No, you're right. Time management is so critical in so many roles, not just sales, but particularly sales. And I'm glad you brought it up because it's one of the things I failed to mention because I'm an OCD freak. And so, like, organization's one of those things that just kind of comes naturally to me that God gave me.
Yeah.
So I have to work at the other things, and organization is just one of those things that just kind of come with me as a package. But you know what? A lot of guys out there that are better salespeople than they struggle with that organization.
Absolutely.
And some of the best sales reps I've ever worked with had issues in that area. So I'm glad you brought that up because that's pertinent.
As a sales manager, though, how do you help them? What can you do as a sales manager when you have that? Because Kendra Jamada used to say it all the time. I'd rather have people I have to pull back than light a fire under. But if you get a whole team of people that you have to pull back, it can be stressful as a sales manager. What do you put in place, or how do you help those personalities?
Let me have a whole team. I think part of it starts with the hiring and recruiting, and I think that you have to have balance within your team. I think if you have, a whole team of people with one personality trait, they'll run you crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to have that mix in your team, just so that you can hit your goals and have a little bit of sanity at the end of the day. But to answer that question directly, working with people who lack some of the organization skills, I think it's twofold. I think number one, you got to be willing to help them. I firmly believe that my role as a sales manager is to help the rep see the bigger picture because they're focused on their thing. My role is to just communicate with them so that they understand the bigger picture at hand. And I feel like that when a rep understands the bigger picture and why they're doing what they're doing and how it fits with the organization, then they're more cognizant of the steps they need to take to make that happen. So I think open communication, transparency, letting them in on what the bigger picture is allows them to be more efficient because most people will figure it out if they're given the right motivation to do so.
One of the things that I struggled with, I've been when we talked about this before we came on, I've been a business owner, which also made me quasi sales manager. And a lot of people, when you just start your own business, you become a sales manager if you get people on your staff that are sales and you may not have that sales experience. But I've also been a sales manager, and that was my role, not near as long as you have, but I found it not difficult, I think, because I try to have empathy for people, but I've seen the tendency to manage people with these based off my traits. In other words, I don't need a lot of time management help. So probably Brian doesn't either. So I'm going to manage Brian the way I would like to be managed. But as a sales manager, I think you have to treat your salespeople like the clients. You have to be curious about them as well.
Oh, totally. I don't believe, and I've seen, and in one industry I was in, I saw to where there was kind of a cookie cutter approach. It's like, this is our system. These are our steps. This is our script. And it's like, make everybody be robots.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so against that. And because I believe your clients see and smell through it, they just don't believe it. And I believe that we're all individual human beings with strengths and weaknesses. And by and large, most people are good people. And I think we've got to let our salespeople be who they are. And our job is to just help fill in those gaps. As a sales manager, our role is to help them see what's going on and help them fill in the gaps. It's much like a spotter. I'm not a big NASCAR fan. In fact, it bores me. But those NASCAR guys, they have a spotter. They have somebody that's telling them what's going on the track that they can't see. And that's really the sales manager's role. That salesperson's in that car going 200 miles an hour and they're focused on this. Well, my role as a manager is to give them that overview and let them know what's ahead and trust them to respond accordingly.
How much time do you spend with your sales reps on a week? Is it, I know you've got a, I know you pretty well, so I know you have a schedule and I know you stick with it, but there's always the fine line between micromanaging and managing. And the caveat to me is, some people, there are times where everybody, I don't care how successful you've been, because sales go up and down, even if you're successful, you still dip and rise. There are times as a salesperson, you have to let yourself be managed and micromanaged maybe a little bit to get through some hard times. But as a sales manager, you have to know when to tighten the reins and when to let go. So are you we're meeting every day person or once a week? What's your time theory on that?
No, some people would say I may be even a little laissez-faire with it, because I believe they're grown adults, and if I make good hiring decisions, they'll do what they need to do. Um, so my strategy is this: I do a weekly sales meeting in the middle of the week. I don't do a Monday morning. I don't do a Friday. I do it in the middle of the week.
What time on Wednesday?
I do it 9 o'clock Wednesday morning.
Okay, I thought you might be one of those. Hey guys, we're having a sales meeting at 5:30 on Wednesday night.
No, 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 no. No, those are on Friday. I try to meet with the team, every Wednesday, middle of the week, kind of check in, go over things that are pertinent to the whole group. I typically do one-on-ones weekly, and they're usually 30 minutes, kind of where's your head at, what's going on, boom, boom, boom. Those are usually pretty simple. And then I am a raise your hand if you need me kind of guy. I am not I'm riding with you on Thursday. I generally do not go on sales calls unless I'm invited, but I generally will go on 95% of sales calls I'm invited on. So I believe that it is the reps, it's up to them to decide, hey, look, I need some help on this one, or I prefer some support, or this client's going to feel appreciated with management or leadership being present. So I'm kind of a raise your hand if you need me guy. And another thing I'll tell you too is I tend to be more hands-on with a rep who's having success than I do with one that's struggling. And here's why. The guy that's succeeding becomes his own worst enemy, because he starts falling out of routine and starts developing bad habits. So I'm there to cheer him on, but then also to keep his head on, or her head on,
Right.
and to keep her following the system and not losing sight of it through busyness and success. The person who's sucking wind, the last thing they need is somebody up their tailpipe kicking them. They're on commission. They don't need somebody riding them right now. They're struggling.
They know what they're doing once or twice a month when they get the paycheck. They feel the heat.
Yeah, there's the old saying, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I don't really take a tact of afflicting anyone, but I do believe in comforting the afflicted. And I believe that I've got to be the guy that they can come in here, sit on my couch in my office and vent, because this is an emotional game. And so the people that are struggling, I'm here for them to vent, and I'm here to listen to them. The people who are doing great, my role to them is just to keep that momentum going, but then not let them lose sight of the fundamentals. And so that's kind of how I handle it.
You said the word emotions, and I'm a big believer that people do business with us based off emotions. Even when people say they're very analytical and they love numbers, that's usually because it gives them a certain feeling. They're good at it. So there's all kinds of, underneath the surface reasons. But as salespeople, and I'll tell you and just observing you over the years, one of the things I think that made you successful, and you can say, it's perseverance, but it's you had the ability to take what you learned, and most good salespeople do this, and find out how to take that knowledge, listen to the client, and then exactly like you were saying, make it fit the emotional need of the client. Because at the end of the day, that client needs to feel a certain way about you. They may not be able to use words to express it. We use words like trust, but really they just need to feel a certain way about you and feel a certain way about your product. And the knowledge plus the ability to understand that people make it about the decision with emotions, I think is vital. I think a lot of salespeople think if I know the product well enough, that will be enough. And sometimes it is. But if you don't know how to translate that into an emotional message, I think a lot of salespeople miss the boat on that. It's not just what you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's the saying that the mind justifies what the heart desires.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, all the justification in the world doesn't work unless the heart desires it. So to your point, um, they buy on emotion and justify with logic.
How many times I use this when I talk to people? How many times, if there's a room full of ladies, I'll say, how many times have you gone shoe shopping with a budget and you've come home over budget? Why do you think they want you in the new car, smelling it and driving it with people looking at you? And I was a real estate, I helped some real estate agents, and I had my license for a short time. And I was walking through a house, and I would notice when potential clients started talking about where they're going to put the furniture, that's a good time to shut up. Because they're putting their couch in a certain place, and they're talking about the holidays. The worst thing I could do is what we were talking about, and that is, all of a sudden start talking about other things and distracting them from the emotions they were putting into that decision. You got just a few more minutes, and then we'll get off here. You sure?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yep.
So I've got all these notes written down, and you've covered so much of it already. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about technology and how it's affected sales since you got into it. So let's don't forget that. But you told a really good story about the power of silence. And I might do a whole sales little online event where I get really successful salespeople to come on and talk about some of their most embarrassing sales calls, or the biggest, the worst moments looking back. I took it when I got hired. It was in the mid 90s or 97, maybe. I can't remember, at Radio Chattanooga. And I heard an ad. I owned a small business at the time, but I'd heard an ad where they were looking for a sales rep. And my job, the company I had, it was a third shift company, and I just got tired of working third shift. I didn't want to manage personalities. Plus, I'd recently gotten married. So I'm like, I'm going to go apply for that job. I'd like to see my family during the middle of the day instead of, missing everything. Got hired, got trained. And two things that I'll bring up that you can address in a minute. One is the phone calls, because I was terrible with the scripts on the phone. I just was awkward, and I'm good at it now, but it's just so awkward when you're doing a cold call. But I got sit on my first lead, Clint, here's the call in. You're on your own, buddy. Go for it. Weeks of training. And I go to this guy, and he owned a travel agency downtown. And I go in and I sit down, and I was the guy I was talking about earlier. I was sweating. I knew I was new. I had this tie on that I hate ties, and it made me look like a minion. I have no neck anyway. And I'm doing my questions, and I'm asking, and I'm looking down, and I look up, and finally the guy has turned his back on me, and he's looking through a file in his file cabinet. And I thought he was going to turn back around and show me something. And I kept asking questions, and he's answering very short. And finally he stops, he turns and looks at me, and he goes, "Are you the dude they hired off that radio ad?" I was like, yeah. He goes, "Oh." And he turned back around and kept filing. He never turned back around. And I go, "Is this a bad time?" He goes, "No, keep going." And I said, I'll come back later. And I got my stuff up, man. I ran out of that office, and I sat in the car thinking, well, I guess I could get another job. This isn't for me. I went back and told Kennard. Kennard walked me through, like, hey, you just screwed up. It's okay. This is what happens. About 6 months later, I got another call in. Same guy called back in. Same dude. Because I didn't follow up. I was terrible. I was terrified of it. And I ended up taking that call. Got him on the radio that time. But if you're a new salesperson out there and you have a bad experience and you think maybe this isn't for me, just understand every salesperson's had that call.
Yeah, totally. I'll tell you one of mine real quick. So I had been in radio for like 8 years. I started with Radio Chattanooga at KZ106, and I was a rep for about 5 years, and then I went into management for a few years. So I had about 8 years into that, and felt pretty confident about sales and sales management and all that. Well, I went into a different industry, and I went into the home improvement industry. And I remember being hired. I went to work at Holco, and when Matt Hollander hired me, I remember telling him, like, "Hey, I've never sold a window before. How am I going to be the sales manager?" He goes, "Buddy, we've done windows for 30 years. We just need somebody to help manage all this." I'm like, okay. So, I started trying to learn everything. Well, I remember the first sales call, like I wrote on a couple sales calls with the guys, kind of watching them. I had the manufacturer's reps come in and train me on products and all this stuff. So here I am, I'm the new guy, not to mention I'm 30 years old at the time. So I'm young, I'm new and I've never been in the industry, and I'm supposed to lead these guys who have worked for this 30-year-old company for years on how to sell products in the home. And I'm like, man, this is uphill, but I'm gonna figure it out. And I went on my first sales call with one of the reps. So this is a guy that, on the org chart reported to me,
Yeah.
that was watching me do my first pitch. And I completely blew it. It was terrible. I had all the terms mixed up, and I'm fidgeting with like this window replacement window sample, and like I couldn't get the screen to come off, and it was ugly. So it like not only was embarrassing, like, with the prospect, but here's this guy here, that I'm supposed to be like training and all this stuff, like, and I just completely whipped.
Yeah.
I mean, it was terrible. And the reality is those moments, they make you stronger at the end, and we're all human. We're
Yeah.
going to screw up, and you know what? It's okay. It's okay. The good
You're
news
earning
is,
your bones.
well, here's the deal. It wasn't like I was a brain surgeon that day with the other brain surgeon watching.
Yeah.
We were selling stuff, and you know what? It was okay. It was okay. And believe it or not, I lasted like 10 more years at that place. So
you did pretty good.
It all worked out.
That when they started training me, and I'm so much. It's amazing. If you're new out there, stick with it, because you will get so much better at it over time. And that's the reason I hated role playing. Looking back on it, there's so much power in it if you can get over the uncomfortableness of it. But they put me on phones, making cold calls. And this is, again, we remember the cubicle setting, right? And we're all friends, but I'm on the phone and I'm like, I went into the conference room upstairs by myself first and would make my phone calls for like 3 or 4 days. I would practice, and I was doing real phone calls, but that was my practice game before I went and sat amongst the seasoned sales reps out there that were going to judge me, and everybody could hear me. And I got it down, right? Hey, this is Clint Powell. Can I talk to, whoever's in charge of your marketing? I'm from Talk Radio, all this stuff. I had it down, I thought. So I go back out, sit in the cubicles, and these cubicles, the wall came up to right here. So you could see about half of someone's body sitting beside you. I'll tell you why that's important. I get on the phone, and normally when you call a company, I'm like, hey, yeah, I was wondering if I could talk to somebody that's in charge of your marketing. And they would go, oh, that's Barbara. I'll get you to her, or they'll be in later. Very rarely, if you call in the middle of the day, at the time, my limited experience, very rarely was I actually getting the person on the phone that made the decision, right?
Right.
So I was used to leaving the voicemail, which is a comfort. So I'm out there. It's my first call. I call. I get the guy. The guy goes, yep, it's me. What you need? And my brain just started clicking, man. And this is, I kid you not, I'm going to give you almost verbatim what I said and then what happened with it. Let me turn this phone off. I'm sorry. So I get this call. I go, Oh yeah. Well, listen, my name's Clint, and I'm with the radio station. The radio station, by the way. I'm with the radio station.
The radio station.
The radio station. And I was wondering if you would like to do some advertising on the radio station, marketing. I'm sure you've got a budget. I'd like to talk to you about your budget. And if you want to, on Talk Radio, I'd love to come over and meet with you and talk to you about your advertising budgets over here with Talk Radio. And he goes, whoa, who are you with again? And about that time, the guy sitting next to me, this is what I see. I see, like, he leans over and goes like that. And I go, I'm just kidding. I'm with US 101. And I slammed the phone down.
I've got one guess. The guy that slid over, was that Dan?
No, he wasn't there yet. It was a guy named Mike. Dan came later, and that's when the mischief ensued. That's when the downfall of Talk Radio started. For 5 years.
Absolutely, yeah, the collapse. Yeah,
we used to have some fun there, and you were part of it, man. It was good stuff back in those days, wasn't it?
It was.
We have a friend of ours, Amy Anchor. She said, "Hey" to my old friends. So, how you doing, Amy? Thanks for
Amy.
tuning in. Hey, let's do this. Let's wrap it up, and we might do a longer session or get you back on to talk about one thing specifically. Let's ask you one last question. I'm looking over the things I wanted to make sure that I touched on to see which one of them I wanted to ask you about before we leave. I'll tell you what, let's do this. Why don't I just ask you to give advice to the sales managers out there? So we've talked about sales, but if you are talking to sales managers and, just a couple of the basics for them as well.
Yeah, I would think, first and foremost, recruiting and hiring is just so important. Getting the right culture fit is going to be the most important thing, because if you have a sales team that works well together and supports one another, your overall success is going to be greater. So, looking for people that have cultural fit within the team is important. I believe in hiring for attitude and training skill. You cannot train work ethic. You cannot train curiosity. You cannot train emotional intelligence. You can train how to tactically present and understand your product in most cases. So, get people with the right attitude that are good culture fit, and then teach them how to do your job. And then, I believe that you just got to treat them like human beings. I believe if you treat people like cogs in a machine, you'll get results that are like cogs in a machine. But
Hmm.
I really believe that if you let people do what, you know, be themselves, I believe that they'll outperform what is written down for them. I believe that most people want to be successful, they want to be good at something, and I believe they want to stick with a career in most cases. And I believe you've got to actually give them the latitude to do that. I don't believe that that is I don't want to say it's unstructured, but I don't believe that's a narrow path. I think that's a wide path, and you've got to give them latitude to explore that.
If I'm Clint Pound, I own a business, or I'm hiring. Let's say I'm just the person responsible for hiring a sales manager, but I have limited resources because I love the hiring. It starts with the hiring, right?
Mhm.
But I know there's an interview process and there's the resume. But are you a believer of getting other people to talk with that potential salesperson so they get input too? Because it seems to me that if I'm the only filter and I'm not a salesperson, really, I could just I don't know what really culture is. I don't know what I'm looking for. So do you get other people involved?
Oh yeah, like where I work now at Partners for Christian Media, so we have J103, and I hire salespeople to go out and sell radio like we used to do years ago.
Yeah.
And my process is this: I generally have an introduction call with the candidate, and my first call, I don't ask them many questions. My first call, I want to find out what questions they have for me, and I want to determine if they're a fit. Because what happens is people get candidates on the hook, and they start drilling them with questions, offer them a job. The candidate gets there 90 days later, they're like, well, this sucks. I don't even like it. So what I want to do is I want to find out, like, why do they want to be here, and what do they want to know about our company. Also, I want to gauge how curious are they, how engaged are they, what kind of emotional and EQ they have. So I ask them about their family and their likes and dislikes and get to know them a little bit, and then I want them to ask me questions about the job so that they can determine if they're interested. Then at the end of that initial interview, I say, hey, look, this is a two-way street. You're interviewing me as much as I'm interviewing you. I want you to think about our conversation. And if you want to move forward in the process, let me know. Talk to the people most important to you in your life,
Hmm.
decide what you want to do, and call me back. Well, then they'll call back and go, hey, yeah, I want to continue. I'll usually do a second interview with them one on one. I'll deal into more questions. And then before I make a hiring decision, I generally assemble a panel that is a mixture of people, usually a sales rep and a couple members of leadership and a support person.
For a panel
Because,
interview?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
in the radio world, our traffic director, our general manager, our finance manager, and myself sit on that panel as well as the sales rep. So it's five people. Number one, you see how they handle that intimidating environment of multiple people. You see how they deal with different personalities. And I tell you what, it's super valuable getting those people's feedback, because that, like, they come to me and like, yeah, that person's never going to make it. Or they come and go, you know, I could be like, yeah, I don't know, and they're like, no, 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 he's good. And so it really helps having another person's perspective, and getting a few people in the mix is usually a good thing.
That's good stuff, man. Listen, I've kept you for almost 50 minutes, and I could probably keep going. We ought to have another podcast one day where we just talk about practical jokes and antics around the old radio station. That would be pretty fun.
Absolutely. Well, I'm up for it. So thank you for having me.
Man, I really appreciate it. If somebody listens to this and they want to find out more about what you do or where you work, how do they get a hold of you? What do you do for a living now so people know they can find you?
Oh gosh, what do I do for a living? So I work at J103. We have an advertising sales team, and so we call local businesses, help with advertising. I also do, some kind of side coaching and consulting for sales and marketing, just because I've been in that crazy business a long time. And then I also own a roofing company. So my roofing company is called RemoteRoof, and so we use aerial technology to grab the measurements, and the process is all virtual. So, if people are quarantining or don't want salespeople in their house, like I actually, as an introvert, I designed a sales process to not have to sell. So I have that. So I do a few things. But yeah, I'm Brian with an I, Brian, B Brock at gmail.com. That's the best way to get me.
There
So
you go.
I'm happy to help, happy to talk shop anytime.
Thanks, buddy, man. I hope everything's good.
Yes, sir. Hope it's good with
All
you
right.
too, my friend.
Bye, Brian. See you. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye.